Welcome to this episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Mignot. Each episode, I bring on a different amazing Black woman as part of my 29 Days of Magic series, where I interview a Black woman a day for the entire month of February, and they share their story. And today, I'm super excited to have Janel Martinez, who's a writer / content creator. She's got an amazing story, and I can't wait for you all to take a listen. Hey, Janel.
Hey, Laura. How are you?
Good. Welcome to the podcast. So delighted to have you.
Thank you. I'm extremely honored that you would have me. So yes, thank you so much.
Awesome. Glad to have you. So first questions, always the same. Answers, always amazing. I'm sure yours will be no different. So Janel, what was your first job?
Ooh, my first job was through actually summer youth. So shout out to anyone from New York that was part of summer youth. And I, in fact, trying to think, that first job was actually at a nursing home. Yes, that was
Wow.
actually the first that I had through summer youth. Mm-hmm.
And what did you do?
So it was kind of like, now that I look back on it, it was like one of those like hybrid roles at a nursing home. I think I was mainly just like whatever, I don't want to say whatever was needed, but essentially
Whatever was
like,
needed.
yeah, so like making sure that the elders were able to get to their programs. So, some were more mobile than others. So, making sure that they knew where programs are happening. And actually, when I think back to it, though, at the time I was like, oh, you know, I didn't get one of the other jobs like at a summer camp, which I later did get a job through summer youth at, or some of the what I considered quote unquote cooler jobs. But when I think back on it as we are having this conversation, it truly was a transformative experience because I really did get a chance to sit with a lot of the elders that were in the nursing home, and they would drop some gems that I at the time I didn't even grasp, but now that I like think about it, I'm like, wow, they really knew, they really were reflective on their lives, and in certain conversations did impart that on me. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so we go from helping out folks at the nursing home to where you are now. What was that journey like?
Yeah, so I think what really resonates in terms of my journey is that there's been many different chapters in the work that I've done. So started off, at a nursing home, then worked at a camp. I babysat, more so like family. I've done that. That was actually prior to nursing home, now that I think about it. But then, I've always been very interested in writing. And so, and really media has been something that always intrigued me as a child. I loved magazines. So when you think of Essence and Vibe, when you think of Ebony, and my mom had a subscription to Jet. So I was very much so connected to printed media. And then I also sat myself down in front of the TV before I did my homework to watch Oprah. So I was really into, sitcoms, interview shows, and magazines. And so uh, when it came time to go into college, I knew something media related was going to be the thing. And so I ended up going to Syracuse University and was in the communication school, settled on magazine journalism actually. And from there, had the opportunity to work at publications like Latina, Black Enterprise. That also led me into my own entrepreneurial journey. So, launching my own destination called Ain't I Latina, where I celebrate and highlight Black women of Latin American and Caribbean descent. I've done things in the tech space. I've also, done a lot of freelance writing throughout my journey for a number of outlets. Most recently, in addition to still writing, work in like the social media space. And so my journey has definitely taken on many different forms. But I do think storytelling has been at the core of the last 10 plus years, if you will.
Awesome. So tell me more about the program that you've launched to highlight, Afro-Latina women, because I think, sometimes this is obviously a big cultural thing with regards to who and who isn't classified as Latina. And, I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, so with Ain't I Latina, it really came about through my lived experience growing up, born to two Black parents from the Caribbean coast of Honduras. And, in our home, there was always a very clear understanding that we were Black, but we just so happened to be of Latin American descent through Honduras. And more specifically, my family is Garifuna, which is an Afro-Indigenous language and community found in specific countries in Central America. So Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Belize, we actually descend from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And so I didn't always have this language to talk about, my identity, but there were definitely key elements of culture that were very consistent. What was interesting is that whenever I left my home, there was a lot of questions in specific spaces. So the fact that my last name is Martinez, and that really isn't an indication of Latin Americanness, right? Because there can be someone with a different last name that is still of Latin American descent. It's just because colonization, last names could be different. But it was always a question of like, wait, what are you? Like, where's your family from? And I really took those experiences as, though uncomfortable for sure, growing up, as fuel to, put that into my writing. And ultimately, after working in media and not necessarily seeing a space for Black women of Latin American descent, the digital space, I always have to credit, like particularly social media, was a space where you can see yourself reflected. But in terms of like a platform, and this is like, I launched Ain't I Latina in December of 2013. So a little over a decade ago, I didn't see, a storytelling platform that, I wish existed. And so for me, I basically stopped waiting for it and I created it. And it really has allowed me to tell, and document and archive our stories. So I've spoken to a number of, I'll use the term Afro-Latinas or Black Latinas. So I know the terminology, people can refer to themselves differently, but spoke to so many amazing, amazing women through my platform, from activists to artists to authors, you name it. I've had a chance to speak to folks. And so for me, it really was about visibility, at least in the beginning. And I think now, because that was that was 10 years ago, even my own identity has taken shape in new ways. So of course, always knowing, and uplifting my Blackness, but that really just being the core. I just so happen to be of Latin American descent, but knowing that, and I hope that people, when they come across Ain't I Latina, whether it's the blog, whether it's our social media account, whether it's even an interview that I've done, that it's very clear that there is a deep pride in Black womanhood and being a Black woman and femme, and that we just so happen to be of Latin American descent, and that many of us have known who we are prior to hashtags and, this sort of new wave visibility. Like, there has always been a very clear understanding of and embracing of Blackness in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Because I know that obviously, a lot of my team is identifies as Afro-Latina, and I think it's oftentimes folks are surprised because they're varying shades. And when they start speaking Spanish, sometimes people are like, "What? Huh?" because the images they see on TV, is Jennifer Lopez, Mark Anthony, Miranda, as opposed to Amara Negra and more. Like, and I think that's where a lot of I don't want to call it confusion because it's like everyone's different and you should be open to that. But like, it does seem like even within the Latin American community that there is this rampant colorism.
Yeah, and I feel like, and I always have to say this, I think we live in a world where colorism is prevalent, anti-Black racism is prevalent. I think there is a greater focus sometimes when it comes to Latin America. And I think in the last few years, what I've actually found to be quite unfortunate is that it's made into a joke, right? Like I see it all the time on social where there's like this, I don't even know if it's a meme, but there's like oftentimes people will say like, oh, here they go with the I know Black. And it's like that, of course. And if it's not just Latin America where there's some people who are struggling with their Blackness, but I also think the added layer to it is when you look at the history of colonization in Latin America, right? The fact that there is still a great embracing of Blackness. And really, when you look at it, like if you go to certain areas of, Latin America, I'll specifically speak to, where my family's from. The Caribbean coast of Honduras is very Black and very indigenous at the same time. The two can coexist. And how did it get that way? Well, for one, I can only speak to being Garifuna, but we were not enslaved. But also, too, when it came to, because Honduras is a Spanish speaking country, right? They are colonizers in itself, but the preservation of our culture is very much so still intact, from language to musical genres to dance to traditional garb to food. And I think that when you look at a lot of Latin America, whether someone is openly saying, and of course, we know that not every Latin American is Black, right? I think that's really important to say. But the culture is very much so Black. When you look at the food, when you look at the musical genres that dominate these spaces, when you look at religious or really spiritual practices, all of that ties back to the continent. And so I think, though, yes, there is anti-Blackness in Latin America, and when we look at the history, it you can kind of connect the dots there. We see so many communities across Latin America and the Caribbean that are very proud to be Black. And, I wish that was more of the narrative that we saw, because we do live in an anti-Black racist world. So whether we're talking about Latin America, we're talking about the United States of America, we're talking about Europe, it's prevalent everywhere.
It really is. And it's just nauseating on so many levels. Because you're just like, really? Where's people? Can't you just leave us alone? It's hard enough being who we are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it is, to your point, it is tiring, right? And I think what's something important to note, even, and it's something that you mentioned earlier, right? Like when it comes to Blackness and Black identity coming in so many different shades, and we know because of colorism, the darker complexions, or even when it comes to hair texture, the coarser, your hair is, because of featureism, the wider, features are, like all of that really does impact someone's lived experience. And so that those things cannot be denied, but it is also tiring, right? And exhausting, because it's like people are just trying to live their lives. And so unfortunate that a lot of these like isms really weigh so heavily on the Black diasporic community.
Yeah, it shouldn't all be on our shoulders. And thinking about all the work that you probably have to do, like now that you're at this place in your career, what do you think you'd probably tell 18-year-old Janel?
I definitely tell 18-year-old Janelle that you're enough. The fact that I don't ever have to prove anything. I don't have to prove how smart I am. I don't have to prove how black I am. I don't have to prove how, and this was more so I feel like for that date, that time frame, how, Latina I am. No, I don't have to do any of that, right? Like I am whole and amazing just as I am. And so, yeah, like would not, and also knowing that like in addition to being, great just the way that I am, also would say that like even if I don't know how the story is going to end, it's going to end the way that it needs to. Everything works out just the way that it's supposed to. And so I think those are the two things that I would say, because I definitely recall just being very anxious in my late teens about a lot of things. And it's not to say that sometimes those feelings don't come up, but I think I have the tools now to manage them. And I have to remind myself that, yeah, everything always works itself out.
It really does. And a great line that I got from my business coach, which I have like decided to drill in my brain, in the last like 10 to 12 weeks, is what happens when it all works out? Because we're
Mm,
always preparing for the worst. And so it's like, what happens when it works out? When it all works out. And
that's the word.
it's like you reframe it in a way that, it actually goes to the positive. Like we should think of the things of the positive. Like, and as you said, it'll work itself out the way it's supposed to.
Absolutely. And you know what's so I think important about that message is that we have to sort of train ourselves or remind ourselves, what if it all works out, because of the fact that so many of us, and maybe I shouldn't generalize, but I'll speak for myself, is that things have always been hard, right?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
and maybe hard isn't the word, but always requires you to be quick on your feet, having to figure out a solution. And sometimes we get so used to that, like it kind of ingrains in us that things and the journey is hard. So if it works out and it's not hard, what step did we miss? And when is it going to catch up to us? And that's not always the case, right? Like I think sometimes it just can be easy, right? We don't have to overthink it. We don't have to be on step 5 when we just started step 1. Like trust
Exactly.
that
Like
it
stop
works
jumping
out.
ahead. Take it easy.
Exactly. And that's something that is a constant. It has to be, at least for me, I have to remind myself of that, because oftentimes I feel like things have to be this sort of process that isn't easy. And if it is easy, then I'm like the shoe's gonna drop, and then I'm gonna have to again figure something out. And that's not really the case.
It really is. So, and I think it's a great way to sort of look at the world around us. And obviously, you're doing a tremendous amount of work on a daily basis. So, what does Janelle do for Janelle? What do you do for your self care?
Ooh, I really love this question because I'm really in my self-care era now because I think it comes with age and just, needing to pour into myself. And so I like to start my mornings when as often as possible for me. So that can look like journaling, that can look like even if I'm reading one page of a book, even though I'd love to read more pages some mornings, I listen to podcasts while I'm, en route to where I need to go. I start my morning with a warm beverage or drink. So, like, that could be coffee, that could be tea. Really just trying to like start my day pouring into myself before I have to do whatever else I have to do for the day. Um, Self care also looks like making sure that I am being intentional about the joy that I'm having. So I actually shared this with a few friends not too long ago about sometimes we have this tendency to have other people bring joy to our lives, whether that's, oh, a friend is like, let's go out and do this, or you have a partner that's like, oh, yeah, let's, spend time doing XYZ. But being intentional about saying, like, oh, I want to see this art exhibit. Maybe somebody wants to go with me, maybe they don't. I'm going to go anyway. Or I feel like having this nice meal, it's probably a treat, something that I don't normally do, but let me make sure that I prioritize that and have that for that day. So the things like that. And then also, I would say I tend to always do or have a form of movement practice. So I'm definitely prioritizing, whether it's Pilates or spin class or something that gets me moving. So I'd say those are like the key things I'm doing now, but really just trying to ensure that I'm taking care of myself.
The most important thing. Janelle,
Mm-hmm.
you're just a wealth of awesome wisdom. I adore it. So I have one more question for you. Do you have a give and or an ask for the audience?
Ooh. I'm going to say I have an ask of the audience. And I say this because sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't want to ask, or, any of those sorts of things. It's like this thing that it's like, oh, I don't need to ask of others, but I'm going to definitely ask this. So, as you mentioned earlier, I am a writer. My work has been featured in a variety of publications, and also I have the opportunity to be featured in an young adult anthology, Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed. And so, if anyone is tuned in that is a an agent that maybe like, hey, I'm interested in, what Janelle is writing about, who Janelle is. I'd love to connect because I'm in that space of looking to get my own book project published. So, yes, I'm going to ask the audience if they themselves or if they know of someone, I'd love to connect.
You gotta say it with your whole chest, Janelle. That was a long-winded way of saying, if you know an agent who could help me get my book published, please say hi to me.
Yes, and I appreciate, Laura. Thank you for succinctly communicating what it is that I'm asking. And I think even me giving the whole story, right? Like we don't always need the story. So yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, that's why I'm here as a host. You know, I always say to everyone on my team, say it with your whole chest. Because
Mhm.
obviously no folks will hear it unless you say it with your whole chest. Not like, you might be okay. No, this is what I want.
Right.
So I love that for you. And I have some connects that I think might be able to point your direction, but like I think once you get your episode up and they see how awesome you are, I will point them to you and help in your quest because we need more of our voices out there, and yours is a fantastic one. And I'm so glad we're able to get you on the podcast to share who you are and your amazing journey and all the great things that you're up to, and the more stuff you even will do along the way. So thank you so much for being part of Today 9 Days of Magic.
Thank you, Laura, so much for having me, and thank you for creating this very intentional space for Black women to share, what it is that we are doing in our magic, and you as a phenomenal host. So thank you just so much for this opportunity.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And that is our show.